It all started on a bright Saturday morning in the sleepy suburb of Maplewood Heights, a community so meticulously manicured it seemed like a movie set. I had just finished my early morning rounds as sheriff and decided to take a short drive before heading back to the station. My neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and identical houses that screamed conformity. I parked my car in my driveway, enjoying the rare tranquility, only to hear the unmistakable voice of HOA Karen Whitman blaring across the cul-de-sac. Karen was infamous in Maplewood Heights for her obsession with rules, regulations, and a supposed moral authority over everyone else's life. She had the uncanny ability to transform even the most mundane disputes into full-blown crises. And that morning, as fate would have it, I was her target. She stomped toward me, a fury in her eyes, holding a shiny brass object she proudly called her master key. "You can't just park here," she barked, thrusting the key toward my car. "I have the right to open any vehicle in the community if there's a violation." I looked at her calmly, hands in my pockets. The absurdity of the situation didn't escape me. "Karen," I said, my tone level, "that's my car. You don't have a right to it." She laughed, a high-pitched triumphant sound. "Oh, Sheriff, don't act all high and mighty. The HOA rules apply to everyone." The problem, as she would soon discover, was that I am the sheriff of Maplewood County. And the consequences of ignoring me were more serious than she could imagine. But at this point, Karen had no idea she was facing the very law enforcement officer she spent months trying to micromanage. Her face twisted into a mixture of confusion and frustration when the key refused to turn. She jiggled it violently, muttering curses under her breath, until finally, in a fit of panic and rage, she whipped out her phone. 911. "Yes. There's a man here refusing to obey HOA regulations. He's violating." I held up a hand, amused. "Karen, you're calling the sheriff on the sheriff." She froze mid-sentence, phone in hand, her eyes widening as she processed what I just said. Her lips trembled, and I could see the wheels turning furiously in her mind. She realized she might have underestimated me, but her pride wouldn't let her back down immediately. I didn't know," she stammered, though she clearly thought she could still salvage the situation. I leaned against my car, maintaining a casual demeanor that contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside her. "Karen," I said, voice calm but carrying authority, "you need to put the phone down. Now." But Karen, as always, had tunnel vision. She dialed anyway, insisting that anyone, enforce the HOA's authority. Within minutes, a dispatcher answered. 911. "What's your emergency?" "This man," Karen began, gesturing at me. "He's refusing to allow me to enforce HOA rules. He's violating regulations." Before she could continue, I interrupted, keeping my tone firm yet polite. "Hello, this is Sheriff James Harper. I live at this residence, and the individual on the line is threatening to commit trespass and harassment. I need a report filed immediately, please." Karen's jaw dropped as the dispatcher confirmed my identity. "Sheriff Harper." "Yes, sir. We can make a note of this." I hung up the line, watching Karen's face turn the deepest shade of crimson I've ever seen. Her carefully curated aura of superiority crumbled in seconds. She stared at me, eyes wide, as if trying to comprehend how the universe had conspired to humiliate her so completely. I didn't know," she squeaked. I crossed my arms, enjoying the moment. "You might want to reconsider how you approach your neighbors, Karen, especially the ones who carry badges and guns." Her lip quivered as she tried to maintain composure. "You can't treat the HOA rules as optional," she said, though the confidence in her voice faltered. "I treat the law as mandatory," I replied smoothly. "The HOA rules. Optional at best, when they conflict with county law." The irony was delicious. Karen had spent months policing mailbox heights, garden gnome placement, and even fence color, wielding her master key like a scepter of tyranny. Yet, here she was, powerless, humiliated, and defeated by someone she never suspected, the person who enforced the very law she thought she could bend to her will. But Karen wasn't done. She was resilient in her arrogance. "I'm going to report you to the HOA board," she hissed, pointing an accusing finger. "They'll make you pay for this." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You're welcome to try. But remember, Karen, the sheriff has a lot of influence on HOA decisions in this county, and you've just given me a very good reason to reconsider your privileges." Karen sputtered, unsure whether to flee, attack, or collapse. I let her stew in her own humiliation for a few moments, enjoying the rare satisfaction of witnessing pure karma in motion. Then, I decided it was time to defuse the situation, carefully, but decisively. "Let me give you some advice," I said, softening my tone. "Next time, before you use your master key, make sure you know whose property you're meddling with, and maybe take a deep breath. It'll do wonders for your blood pressure." Karen's face was a mixture of rage and shame. She looked as if she wanted to crawl into a hole, and honestly, I didn't blame her. The memory of this morning would haunt her for weeks, possibly months. She stammered, but I cut her off. "No, Karen, no more words. I suggest you go home and reflect on today's events. And maybe, just maybe, try not to call 911 on the sheriff again." Finally, she turned and stomped back to her house, muttering incomprehensible threats that faded into the distance. I watched her go, feeling the satisfaction that only comes from seeing a bully humbled in the most spectacularly public way. As I returned to my car, I reflected on the absurdity of suburban life. The HOA, with all its supposed power, was nothing compared to the law. And while Karen thought her master key gave her authority, it was little more than a metal stick in the hands of someone utterly unprepared for reality. The rest of the day passed in a blissful calm. I went about my sheriff duties, but every now and then, I caught myself smiling at the memory of Karen's face. I knew the story would spread through the neighborhood quickly, like wildfire through dry brush. Within hours, residents were calling, laughing, and sharing their own encounters with her overzealous behavior. By the evening, I returned home again, checking my driveway with satisfaction. My car remained exactly where I had left it, untouched, and more importantly, unviolated by HOA tyranny. Karen, I suspected, had spent the day plotting a return. Though the thought of confronting me again likely made her stomach churn. Life in Maplewood Heights returned to its usual rhythm, but the legend of that morning endured. Neighbors whispered about the day HOA Karen tried to assert authority over the sheriff himself. Parents used the tale to teach children lessons about pride and humility. And I couldn't help but chuckle every time I passed by someone sharing the story. Weeks later, the HOA board held a meeting to address complaints, and Karen, predictably, made a grand appearance. She attempted to press the issue, claiming harassment and overreach, only to be met with polite, knowing smiles from board members. Word had reached them about her phone call and my identity, and any attempt to sanction me would have been both futile and embarrassing for them. In that meeting, Karen was reduced to a shrieking echo of authority. Flustered and desperate, while I sat quietly, a neutral observer. It was the perfect victory, unearned, effortless, and utterly humiliating for her. When the session ended, she stormed out, muttering about revenge, though the absurdity of her threats was almost comical. For months afterward, neighbors would occasionally spot her peeking around corners, presumably trying to regain some semblance of control. But the lesson was learned. The sheriff's authority was absolute in his jurisdiction, and a master key was worthless against actual law enforcement. One evening, I hosted a small block party for the community, inviting neighbors to relax and celebrate the autumn season. Karen, predictably, did not attend, and the relief was palpable. Children ran freely, adults shared stories, and laughter filled the air. Occasionally, someone would mention the master key incident, and the group would erupt in knowing laughter, glancing around as if to make sure Karen wasn't eavesdropping. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm golden light over the neighborhood, I reflected on the strange beauty of justice. It wasn't always about force or punishment. Sometimes, it was about subtle, undeniable reminders that arrogance has limits. Karen's attempt to assert control had backfired spectacularly, and the result was a story that would outlive her obsession with HOA rules. That night, I locked my car, smiled at the familiar weight of the keys in my hand, and thought about the strange satisfaction of a day well played. Karen would eventually return, perhaps attempting another confrontation, but the narrative had been set. And in Maplewood Heights, everyone now knew who held the real authority. Life continued in its quiet, orderly way, but every once in a while, I would catch a glimpse of Karen lurking at the edge of her property, glaring at me from afar. I would wave politely, tipping my sheriff's hat. The look on her face was priceless, a mixture of defeat, frustration, and the faintest glimmer of fear. It was the perfect end to a saga that no one would forget anytime soon. The moral of the story became clear. Power is meaningless without understanding boundaries, and pride often precedes the most spectacular falls. Karen had wielded her master key with confidence, believing it granted her supreme authority, only to discover that real power carries responsibility, knowledge, and the backing of the law. As for me, I continued my rounds as sheriff, maintaining peace, order, and occasionally enjoying the lighter side of law enforcement. Maplewood Heights remained picturesque, orderly, and peaceful, but beneath the surface, Residents now harbored a secret amusement at the tale of HOA Karen versus the sheriff. And so, life moved on, with Karen's reputation diminished and my legend quietly cemented. The story would be retold for years. The day a woman with a master key tried to enforce HOA rules, only to discover that the sheriff had the final say. A tale of arrogance, humiliation, and poetic justice, living forever in the annals of Maplewood Heights.